Michael Jordan finds his childhood bus driver working nights, then hands him keys to a new life. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, a small town where the rhythm of everyday life moved slowly, and the aspirations of young athletes were often confined to the limitations of their surroundings. It was a place where sports were more than a pastime; they were a way out, a potential for something bigger, though few ever reached it. For Michael, basketball was never just a game; it was an escape, a calling, and his relentless pursuit of greatness began long before the world recognized his name. In his childhood, one of the most consistent figures in his life was Mr. Earl, the man who drove the school bus every day. For years, Mr. Earl was a fixture in Jordan's daily routine, a quiet but steadfast presence who never missed a game, who always made sure Jordan and his friends got to school on time. It wasn't a job anyone sought out for the glory or the recognition. But to the kids who rode that bus, Mr. Earl was more than just a driver; he was a silent supporter, a figure of reliability in a world full of uncertainty. Jordan's relationship with Mr. Earl wasn't the stuff of legend, at least not back then. It wasn't built on grand conversations or deep moments of mentorship. It was, instead, built on something simpler, a shared respect. Michael, even as a boy, could see that Mr. Earl, like so many others, had a quiet strength. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, just to make sure that the kids he drove to school had a better chance at a future than he ever had. Michael noticed these small acts, these details that others might miss, even if they didn't seem like much at the time. In the small town of Wilmington, basketball wasn't just something to do after school; it was the thing that could lift someone out of obscurity. Michael had talent, there was no doubt about that. His competitive fire was apparent from the beginning. But the drive to be the best came from something deeper than just wanting to win. It came from a belief, almost innate, that he had to prove himself, not just to the world, but to the people like Mr. Earl who showed up every day, even when they didn't have to. Michael's early years were full of typical small-town challenges. The sort of challenges many kids faced: overcoming self-doubt, finding a place where they belonged, and battling the frustration of feeling limited by the circumstances of their birth. But unlike most, Michael had a fire inside him that never seemed to burn out. On the court, he was relentless. Off the court, he worked just as hard, though in ways that might not have been immediately visible to anyone else. He would later talk about how much he learned from the game of basketball itself, the way it taught him discipline, perseverance, and the importance of never backing down. Mr. Earl might have been just a bus driver in the grand scheme of things, but to Michael, he represented something more. He represented consistency in a world that seemed to reward those who were flashy or lucky. He saw Mr. Earl's steady presence every day, saw the man's quiet pride in doing his job right, no matter how unappreciated it seemed to others. In many ways, Mr. Earl was the first real example Michael had of what it meant to be dedicated without seeking recognition. Their relationship wasn't built on grand speeches or heartfelt exchanges. It was built on the simple understanding that Michael was trying to escape, to find a way to be great, while Mr. Earl was just trying to get through another day, another shift. But both of them knew that greatness, in any form, required sacrifice and hard work, things that weren't always obvious to the outside world. When Michael was at UNC, and even more so as he entered the NBA, the pressure to succeed became overwhelming. It was during this time that Michael started to realize just how much his early years shaped him, how the community around him had nurtured his dreams without ever asking for anything in return. The small-town values that Mr. Earl embodied were not lost on him. In fact, they became the foundation of his approach to both life and basketball. As Jordan's career grew, so did the impact of his success. His face was everywhere. His game was unstoppable, his will to win unmatched. But with each victory, there was a quiet yearning for something that couldn't be fulfilled by fame or championships. He was winning, yes, but he had always known that something was missing. He began to realize that the journey, the hard work, and the relationships that had gotten him there were just as important as the trophies and accolades. Through all the years of fame, through all the struggles on and off the court, Michael never forgot the small acts of kindness from people like Mr. Earl. They had shaped him in ways he hadn't fully understood as a child, but now, with the weight of success upon him, he started to appreciate just how much those early experiences had influenced his character. Jordan never spoke about it much, but the relationship between him and Mr. Earl, the quiet support that had been so consistent, became a key part of his story. It was no surprise that, when Michael's journey brought him back to his roots, he would seek out Mr. Earl. After all, Michael had seen firsthand what it meant to be dedicated, to show up every day with a purpose, no matter how small the task seemed. And just as Michael had learned to appreciate the people who had quietly shaped his path, he knew that he could offer Mr. Earl the same level of recognition. Mr. Earl's life, though quiet, had been full of dedication. He had given everything to his job, his community, and the kids he drove to school. But in the quiet moments, when the streets were empty and the night shift stretched on, there was a longing. A hope that maybe, just maybe, life would offer him a chance at something more. When Michael finally tracked him down, it was a moment that neither of them expected. It wasn't about the fame or the money, it was about two people, from different worlds, coming together in a shared understanding of what it means to work hard and to give everything for the chance to make a difference. This was just the beginning of a story that would redefine their lives, a story of how one man's success could change another's fate forever. But for now, it was still about those quiet moments in the small town of Wilmington, where ambition and loyalty met, not with fanfare, but with the promise of something bigger. Michael Jordan's rise to fame seemed inevitable. As a young athlete, he was a relentless competitor, driven by something deep within that always pushed him beyond the ordinary. His talents were undeniable, but it was his work ethic, his refusal to accept mediocrity, and his unyielding desire to be the best that set him apart. But the journey to greatness, to become one of the most iconic basketball players in history, didn't happen overnight. During his time at the University of North Carolina, Jordan began to realize that basketball wasn't just a game, it was the means to an end. He wanted more than just to play for a championship, he wanted to build a legacy. The lessons he learned on the court weren't just about shooting or passing, but about how to rise above challenges and stay committed to a goal even when the road was tough. This determination would later define him. In those early years, however, he was still the same young man from Wilmington, North Carolina. He was competitive, often fiercely so, and deeply connected to the people who had been with him from the start. His family, his friends, and people like Mr. Earl, the bus driver who had always been there for him, were the ones who kept him grounded. They weren't the ones who celebrated his successes on national TV, but they were the ones who made sure he never lost sight of where he came from. The start of his NBA career was nothing short of a whirlwind. The 1984 draft marked the beginning of a new chapter, as Jordan was selected by the Chicago Bulls, a team struggling to find its identity. Jordan arrived in Chicago as a young star, already commanding attention with his skills and confidence. But the pressure was immense. Every game, every shot, every dribble was scrutinized. The expectations were high, and the competition even higher. In those early days, Jordan's natural talent was evident, but he wasn't yet the dominant force he would become. He was a rising star, but to become the best, he had to learn more than just how to score. He had to learn how to elevate those around him, how to lead, and how to deal with the intense scrutiny that came with being the face of a franchise. It wasn't an easy transition. He faced criticism, doubts about his ability to win, and a team that, though talented, wasn't yet ready to compete for championships. The turning point came in the late 1980s. Jordan had already begun to dominate the league with his incredible athleticism, but his Chicago Bulls were still a team in need of leadership. The media and fans alike were beginning to ask the same question: could Michael Jordan win a championship? He was undoubtedly talented, but could he do it when it mattered most? The pressure only intensified, but it was during this time that Jordan began to refine his game. He realized that being the best meant doing more than just scoring points. It meant sacrificing for the team, setting an example, and pushing his teammates to do their best, even when things were tough. He began to understand that winning wasn't just about individual accolades, it was about collective effort. This was the beginning of the evolution of Michael Jordan, not just as a player, but as a leader. While the Chicago Bulls were still in the process of becoming a championship-caliber team, the personal sacrifices Jordan made off the court were also beginning to take their toll. It wasn't just the intense focus on basketball, it was the way the game consumed him. He spent countless hours perfecting his shot, studying his opponents, and working on his physical condition. There was no time for anything else. For Jordan, basketball was his life, and there was nothing that could stand in the way of his goal to be the best. During this time, though his fame was growing, Jordan remained tethered to his roots. Wilmington was never far from his mind, and neither was Mr. Earl. In the midst of the chaos of his burgeoning career, Jordan would often think back to the people who had been there for him when he was still just a kid trying to figure things out. Mr. Earl was one of those people, even if they hadn't seen much of each other since Michael's rise to fame. But their connection was still strong. Jordan never forgot the bus driver's quiet loyalty, how Mr. Earl had been a constant, even when so many other things in Michael's life were constantly changing. Though Michael's life was now full of glamorous dinners, parties, and the media frenzy that followed him everywhere, there was something grounding about remembering where it all began. It wasn't just the game that had shaped him, it was the people around him, the ones who had always been there, even when no one else was watching. The 1990s brought with it a wave of new challenges, both on and off the court. Jordan was becoming the face of the NBA, and with that came not just fame, but the expectations of an entire generation. His competitive fire burned hotter than ever, but it wasn't just about winning now, it was about proving that he could lead a team to greatness. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for something bigger. The rivalry with the Detroit Pistons, particularly with their Bad Boys era, would be one of the defining chapters in Jordan's career. They were brutal, relentless, and they understood how to stop Jordan, or so they thought. But Jordan's refusal to back down, his dogged determination, and his ability to learn from his losses turned that rivalry into a defining moment in his career. He faced criticism, he was beaten down, but he didn't quit. Every loss fueled him, every hit he took made him stronger. By the time the 1991 season rolled around, the Chicago Bulls had transformed into one of the most dominant teams in the NBA. Jordan had found his rhythm. He had learned to trust his teammates, to lead by example, and to take his game to a level that no one had ever seen before. The Bulls were ready, and so was Michael Jordan. The road to the first championship was no longer just a dream, it was within his reach. But even with all the success, all the accolades, and all the victories, Jordan's mind still wandered back to Wilmington. He thought about Mr. Earl, the bus driver who had always been there, quietly supporting him, even when he hadn't known it. Jordan was now playing on the biggest stage in the world, but the lessons he had learned from his childhood and the people who had shaped him were still fresh in his mind. The game had given him everything he had ever dreamed of, but it was the people, the simple acts of kindness, and the quiet sacrifices of men like Mr. Earl that truly helped him get there. As Jordan's career reached new heights, with each championship bringing him closer to immortality, the weight of his success began to take on a different meaning. He wasn't just playing for the trophies or the rings anymore, he was playing for something deeper. He was playing for the people who had supported him from the very beginning. His mind, once consumed only by the game, now reflected on the impact his success had on others. His journey had always been about more than just basketball, it was about honoring the people who had helped shape him, even in ways they might never understand. By 1991, as Jordan and the Chicago Bulls captured their first NBA title, the city of Chicago, and the world, knew that a new chapter in basketball history had begun. Michael Jordan wasn't just the best player in the league, he was becoming a global icon. Yet, in the back of his mind, he remembered those who had quietly stood by him from the very start. And he knew that he owed much of his success to the people, like Mr. Earl, who had always believed in him, even before the world did. The 1991 NBA championship was a defining moment for Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. The city of Chicago, the basketball world, and even the entire country watched as Jordan and his teammates, led by coach Phil Jackson, overcame the challenges of their rivals to claim the title. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and personal growth. Jordan was finally a champion, but as much as the victory tasted sweet, it also marked the beginning of an even greater challenge: how to sustain greatness and push the boundaries of what was possible. The pressure that came with being an NBA champion was unlike anything Jordan had experienced before. He was no longer just a rising star, he was the face of the league, and every game, every moment, was scrutinized in ways that no player had ever been before. The expectations were sky high, but Jordan's approach remained unchanged. He worked harder, practiced longer, and pushed himself and his teammates to their limits. His unrelenting drive to be the best was what set him apart, but it was also what isolated him. The focus on winning consumed him. During this time, Jordan's relationship with his teammates deepened, though it wasn't always an easy road. His leadership style was demanding. He expected nothing less than perfection, and while many of his teammates rose to the challenge, there were moments of tension. Jordan could be brutal in his critiques, often pushing his teammates to their breaking points. But he wasn't just pushing them for the sake of criticism, he was pushing them because he believed they were capable of greatness, just as he believed in his own potential. It was a tough love approach, but it worked. The Chicago Bulls became a powerhouse, and Jordan led them to a second consecutive title in 1992. As much as he thrived on the court, the spotlight began to take a toll. The relentless media attention, the constant pressure, and the never-ending expectations started to weigh on him. His personal life was under constant scrutiny, and even the smallest mistakes were amplified. Jordan's every move was followed, every word analyzed. While he had always been competitive, the need for privacy and the toll of constant public attention began to eat away at him. It wasn't just the media that took a toll. Jordan's own mental and emotional state began to fray. He was winning championships, achieving legendary status, but something felt missing. Basketball, for all its glory, wasn't enough to satisfy him anymore. His passion for the game was still there, but the fire that had driven him to be great had started to dim. Jordan began to question whether he had reached the pinnacle of his career, and whether there was anything left for him to accomplish. The world didn't understand the weight Jordan was carrying. He had everything: fame, wealth, championships, but the pressure of it all was taking its toll on him in ways that no one could fully see. And so, in the spring of 1993, Michael Jordan shocked the world by announcing his sudden retirement from basketball. The decision seemed to come out of nowhere. Jordan had just led the Bulls to their third consecutive title, and it seemed like he was at the peak of his career. But Jordan was done. The decision to retire was influenced by many factors, but the most immediate one was the death of his father, James Jordan Sr. The loss of his father shook Michael to his core. The man who had been his rock, his support system, was gone, and it left a void in Jordan's life that nothing, neither basketball nor fame, could fill. James Jordan had always been his biggest fan, and his untimely death left a gaping hole in Jordan's world. The grief was overwhelming, and Michael needed to step away, to grieve, to reflect, and to find a sense of peace. In the aftermath of his retirement, Jordan took a break from basketball to explore something else: baseball. His father had always dreamed of him playing the sport, and Jordan felt a deep need to honor that dream. In the spring of 1994, he signed a minor league contract with the Chicago White Sox and began playing for the Birmingham Barons, a Double-A affiliate. While Jordan's baseball journey was widely scrutinized and criticized, it was, for him, a way to find peace and escape from the suffocating pressure of the NBA. Baseball was a different world, and Jordan embraced it with the same intensity that he had brought to basketball. He worked tirelessly, practicing his swing, working on his fielding, and trying to adjust to the world of professional baseball. The transition wasn't easy. Jordan struggled at the plate and his batting average wasn't impressive, but he didn't let the failure break him. Instead, it gave him the space to heal, to work through his grief, and to find a new sense of purpose outside of the game that had consumed him for so long. Meanwhile, the Chicago Bulls, without Jordan, faltered. The team was still strong, with key players like Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant stepping up, but it was clear that something was missing. The chemistry, the leadership, the heart of the team, without Jordan, the Bulls weren't the same. While they still made it to the Eastern Conference semifinals, it was clear that they lacked the edge that Michael brought to the table. Jordan's time in baseball also gave him a chance to reconnect with his roots. He wasn't just an athlete anymore, he was a person. He had to learn how to be someone other than the greatest basketball player in the world. He had to rediscover who he was without the game. But, as he quickly realized, it wasn't that simple. Basketball was a part of him, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't escape it. It had defined his life for so long that there was no way to sever that connection. The mental and emotional toll of retirement was heavier than Jordan anticipated. His love for basketball hadn't faded; if anything, it had grown stronger. But there was also a sense of something missing, something he hadn't anticipated when he left the NBA. He wasn't just missing the game itself, he was missing the people, the camaraderie, and the challenge of competing at the highest level. The love for baseball had been real, but it wasn't the same. He needed to return to basketball, to the game that had defined him. It wasn't long before Michael Jordan made the decision to return to the NBA. In March of 1995, he shocked the world once again by announcing his return to the Chicago Bulls. His message was simple: "I'm back." The announcement was met with shock, excitement, and anticipation. Michael Jordan was returning to the game, and he was returning to win. But this time, things were different. Jordan wasn't just coming back to reclaim his place at the top. He was coming back to prove to himself that he still had what it took to be great. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. He wasn't returning to the same team he had left. But the fire that had driven him for so long was back, and with it, a new sense of purpose. This return would mark the beginning of another chapter in his legendary career, one that would lead to even more triumphs, challenges, and, ultimately, a legacy that would change the game forever. When Michael Jordan returned to the NBA in March of 1995, the basketball world erupted in a frenzy. It wasn't just that the greatest player of all time was back on the court, it was that the man who had defined the league in the late 1980s and early 1990s was now coming back after an emotional, 2-year hiatus. Jordan's return wasn't just about reclaiming his throne, it was about proving to himself, and the world, that he still had the fire to lead, to compete, and to win at the highest level. The timing of Jordan's return couldn't have been more dramatic. The Chicago Bulls had struggled without him. They were still a solid team, led by the strong performances of Scottie Pippen and a few other key players, but the absence of Jordan left a void that was clearly felt. The championship pedigree, the killer instinct, and the overwhelming presence Jordan brought to the court were all missing. Even though the Bulls had continued to perform well in the regular season, there was an unspoken understanding that they weren't truly championship contenders without their leader. Jordan's return was a shock to many, but to others, it felt almost inevitable. Basketball was in his blood, and no matter how much time he had spent away, it was clear that Jordan's heart remained with the game. His comeback was not just about reclaiming his old form, it was about reinvigorating the team, reinvigorating the city, and reinvigorating the league. Michael Jordan wasn't just returning to play basketball, he was returning to restore the dynasty that the Chicago Bulls had built. When Jordan first stepped back onto the court, there was a mixture of emotions, both for him and for the fans who had missed him during his brief retirement. The energy was electric, but there was also uncertainty. Could Jordan regain the level of dominance he once had? Could he elevate his teammates again the way he had during his championship runs? The stakes were high, and Jordan knew it. But his desire to prove himself and silence any doubts was enough to drive him. In his first game back, Jordan made an immediate impact. While he wasn't quite the same player who had left the NBA 2 years earlier, it was clear that he still possessed the raw talent, the competitive drive, and the mental toughness that had defined his career. His scoring was impressive, but it wasn't just his points that stood out. It was his leadership, his energy, and his presence on the court. He didn't just lead by example, he demanded the best from everyone around him, reminding his teammates what it meant to be a winner. Despite his strong return, the road wasn't easy. Jordan's first few games back revealed some of the rust he had to shake off. He wasn't yet the same player he had been in 1993, and his body had to adjust to the grueling demands of an NBA season. His jump shot was a little off, and his timing wasn't quite as sharp as it had been before. But it was Jordan's determination, his unwillingness to back down, that made the difference. He worked through his mistakes, put in the hours of practice, and soon regained the form that had made him a legend. The media and fans watched closely, waiting for signs of weakness or any sign that Jordan wasn't the same player. But with each game, it became clear that his heart and mind were still sharp. He wasn't just trying to win games, he was trying to reassert his dominance and remind everyone why he was considered the greatest. And as the weeks went on, Jordan's presence on the court became undeniable. His leadership was evident in every play, and his competitive spirit was infectious. The team started to gel in a way that hadn't been possible without him. The Chicago Bulls began to regain their swagger, their sense of purpose, and their drive to win. The dynamic between Jordan and his teammates was something special. Even though he had been away for 2 years, he quickly reminded his team of what it took to win. He set a tone of excellence and demanded the best from his fellow players, not out of arrogance, but out of a belief that greatness was a collective effort. His teammates responded. Players like Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc, and Ron Harper found their rhythm in ways they hadn't before, knowing that their leader had their backs. But the challenges of returning were far from over. As the regular season came to an end, it became clear that Jordan was still shaking off the cobwebs. He was in better shape and had regained his scoring touch, but he wasn't quite at the peak he had been when he left. There were flashes of brilliance, but there were also moments of struggle. The sharpness of his first 3 championship runs was still a little out of reach. His body had aged a little, and the game had evolved in his absence. However, the true test of Jordan's comeback was yet to come, the playoffs. The Chicago Bulls had to prove that they could perform under pressure once again. Jordan had led the team to championships before, but now the challenge was to do it again. The competition had gotten tougher, and the league had changed in his absence. But Jordan wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. The postseason was where he thrived, where his true greatness shone through. The stakes were high, and the Chicago Bulls, with Jordan back at the helm, knew that they had to perform at their best if they were to return to the top of the basketball world. As the playoffs unfolded, Jordan's leadership and impact on the court became even more apparent. He was fully engaged, playing with the same intensity and fire that had driven him to greatness in the past. His scoring, defense, and ability to take over games when it mattered were on full display. More than just his individual play, it was his leadership that set him apart. He elevated the level of play of everyone around him, bringing out the best in his teammates, especially in clutch moments. The first playoff series of Jordan's return was against the Charlotte Hornets, a team that had given the Bulls trouble in the past. The games were physical, and the Hornets played with a chip on their shoulder, eager to prove that they could beat the team with the greatest player in the world back in the mix. But Jordan's presence was a game-changer. His leadership and drive took over the series, and the Bulls advanced with relative ease. Next up was the New York Knicks, a team known for its grit and toughness. The Knicks had always been a tough challenge for Jordan, and this series was no different. But Jordan was in full swing, and his performances were the stuff of legend. He dominated on both ends of the court, driving the Bulls past the Knicks and into the NBA Finals. His will to win was undeniable, and every game felt like a battle that only Jordan could overcome. By the time the NBA Finals came around, the Chicago Bulls were a force to be reckoned with. They faced off against the Seattle Supersonics, a team that had the talent to challenge the Bulls, but they lacked the mental fortitude that Jordan brought to the table. Jordan's performance in the finals was otherworldly. His scoring, defense, and leadership were the difference between the two teams, and despite a few bumps along the way, the Bulls eventually clinched their 4th title in 6 years. Jordan had returned, and with him, the dynasty was reborn. Jordan's comeback was nothing short of remarkable. Not only had he led the Bulls back to the pinnacle of the basketball world, but he had done so in a way that reminded everyone why he was the greatest player to ever play the game. His ability to shake off the rust, lead his team, and perform under pressure solidified his place in history. But more than that, it was his resilience, his unwillingness to give up, that made his return so significant. The greatest player of all time had come back to prove that he still had what it took to be the best, and in doing so, he proved that nothing could ever truly replace his passion for the game. After Michael Jordan led the Chicago Bulls to their fourth NBA championship in 1996, it became clear that his return to the league had restored not only the Bulls dynasty but also his own legacy as the greatest player in the game. His influence on the court was undeniable. With his leadership and unrivaled competitive drive, the Bulls had become the team to beat once again. But as much as Jordan's return had been about reclaiming the throne, it also marked the beginning of an intense internal battle. While the success and accolades flowed, Jordan was beginning to feel the weight of his own greatness. The pressure that had defined his career up until that point was reaching new heights. His return to the NBA had been a triumph, but the expectations for continued dominance were unrelenting. It wasn't just about winning anymore. The world expected Jordan to maintain his position at the top of the league, to carry the weight of his team's success year after year, and to keep proving why he was the best. The stakes had never been higher. Off the court, Jordan's life was also under a microscope. His fame had reached global proportions, and while he relished the adoration from fans around the world, he couldn't escape the fact that his every move was scrutinized by the media. His personal life became a subject of constant speculation, and no matter how hard he tried to balance the demands of his basketball career with his family and personal time, the pressure never relented. Despite his efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy, Jordan began to realize just how isolated he had become. His rise to the top had come at a steep price, and with each passing year, the cost became more apparent. In 1997, the Bulls were once again poised to repeat as champions, and Jordan was in the thick of it. The team had found a rhythm, and Jordan was playing at an elite level, dominating games and pushing his teammates to new heights. But even as the team continued to succeed, Jordan's personal battles were becoming harder to ignore. His body, though still incredibly gifted, was showing signs of wear. The years of relentless training, competition, and pressure were beginning to take their toll. As the 1997 to 1998 season began, the Bulls were in the middle of what would become their final championship run with Jordan. The team had been together for a long time, and there was a sense of inevitability that this would be the last dance for many of the key players. The media dubbed it the last dance, capturing the essence of what was at stake. This would be Jordan's last chance to secure another title with the Bulls, and the weight of that knowledge hung over him and his teammates. While the season began with high hopes, it was also clear that things were different. Jordan's leadership had remained steadfast, but he was feeling the pressure more than ever. His body wasn't as fresh as it once had been, and the mental toll of chasing a fifth championship was weighing heavily on him. The challenge wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional. Jordan had given so much of himself to the game, but he could feel the toll it was taking. Every practice, every game, was a reminder of how much he had sacrificed to get to this point. But Jordan's competitive spirit, the very trait that had made him great, would not allow him to give in. He was determined to push through the fatigue, the pressure, and the mental exhaustion. He had made a name for himself by overcoming obstacles, and this time would be no different. He wasn't going to let his legacy be defined by anything other than victory. And as the playoffs began, Jordan proved once again that his desire to win could overcome any challenge. The Bulls' journey to the 1998 NBA Finals was not without its obstacles. They faced tough competition in the form of the Indiana Pacers and the Utah Jazz, both of which tested the Bulls' resolve. The Pacers, led by Reggie Miller, pushed the Bulls to the brink, and the series went to 7 games. But as always, when the stakes were highest, Michael Jordan rose to the occasion. He carried his team through the tough battles, playing with a mix of poise, intensity, and focus that only he could bring. The finals against the Utah Jazz were a fitting stage for Jordan's final run. The Jazz, led by John Stockton and Karl Malone, had been one of the top teams in the Western Conference for years, and they were hungry for a championship. But Jordan wasn't about to let them take it from him. With every game, he proved why he was the greatest player the game had ever seen. His performances in the finals were nothing short of legendary. Even with his body showing signs of wear, Jordan played with an intensity that was unmatched. His scoring, defense, and leadership on the court were the difference makers, as the Bulls once again found themselves in a familiar position, one win away from a championship. The series reached a pivotal Game 6, with the Bulls leading 3-2. The Jazz were determined to force a Game 7, but Jordan had other plans. The final moments of Game 6 are etched in basketball history as one of the greatest individual performances ever. With the game tied and the clock winding down, Jordan, with a slight limp, dribbled to the top of the key. He faked to the right, drove to the left, and with a defender in his face, he sank a jump shot over the outstretched arms of Brian Russell. The shot gave the Bulls a 1-point lead with just 5.2 seconds left, and they would hold on to win the game, clinching the NBA championship. The moment became known as the shot, and it was a fitting conclusion to one of the greatest careers in sports history. Jordan's performance in the 1998 Finals was a testament to his legacy and his ability to perform under pressure. He was, without question, the greatest player of his era. But as he stood on the court, holding the championship trophy for the 6th time, Jordan knew that this was the end of an era. It was a bittersweet victory. While he had reached the pinnacle of his career, it was clear that this would be his final game with the Bulls. The dynasty had come to an end, and Jordan's decision to retire again was inevitable. In the days following the championship, Jordan took time to reflect on his career. He had accomplished everything he had set out to do: 6 championships, 5 MVP awards, countless individual accolades, and a legacy that would be remembered for generations. But despite all of his success, there was a deep sense of fulfillment that came with knowing he had given everything to the game. He had pushed himself to the limit, sacrificed parts of his personal life, and battled through physical and emotional pain to reach the top. And in the end, it was all worth it. Jordan's final season with the Bulls had been about more than just basketball, it had been about legacy. His return to the top of the basketball world had been a testament to his relentless drive and his refusal to be satisfied with anything less than greatness. But as he walked away from the game once again, Jordan knew that his legacy would live on in the hearts of fans and in the stories told about him for generations to come. His impact on the game of basketball was immeasurable, and his influence stretched far beyond the confines of the court. Michael Jordan had redefined what it meant to be a champion, and he had solidified his place as the greatest player to ever play the game. After Michael Jordan's second retirement in 1999, the basketball world found itself in a strange, unfamiliar place. For nearly 2 decades, he had been the face of the NBA, the player who transcended the sport and captured the attention of fans around the globe. His departure, however, left a void that no one could fill. The Chicago Bulls, without their legendary leader, entered a period of transition, and the NBA itself seemed to lose some of the magic that Jordan had brought to the game. Yet, even in his absence, Michael Jordan's influence remained undeniable. The legacy he had built was imprinted on every corner of the basketball world, and his impact stretched far beyond the court. Jordan's retirement was a moment of reflection for the man who had done it all. 6 championships, 5 MVP awards, and countless unforgettable moments. He had reached the pinnacle of the sport and had nothing left to prove. For Jordan, the decision to retire again came from a deep sense of fulfillment. He had accomplished everything he had set out to do, and now it was time for a new chapter in his life. But leaving basketball for good wasn't as easy as it seemed. The game had been a constant in his life since he was a child. It had defined him in ways that few things ever could. And now, with the fame, the accolades, and the trophies behind him, Jordan was left to confront what life would look like after basketball. His love for the game remained, but the realization that he had to move on was a bitter pill to swallow. Jordan's retirement did not mean he was completely absent from the basketball world. Though he stepped away from playing, he remained a prominent figure in the sport, both through his business ventures and as an ambassador for the game. His brand, Air Jordan, continued to dominate the sneaker world, and his global influence in sports marketing was unmatched. He was still a household name, still an icon, but now, he was finding new ways to connect with the game. In 2001, after spending a few years away from basketball, Jordan surprised everyone by announcing that he would return once again, this time, with the Washington Wizards. His decision to return wasn't motivated by the desire to reclaim championships or prove himself on the court. Instead, it was about the challenge. Jordan had always been motivated by competition, by the desire to prove that no matter the odds, he could still be the best. At 38 years old, he was no longer in his prime, but the fire inside him hadn't burned out. He wanted to play again, not for the trophies, but for the love of the game. When Jordan returned to the court with the Wizards, the basketball world greeted him with both excitement and skepticism. Would the greatest player ever be able to live up to his legacy? Would he still have the same dominance, the same drive that had made him a legend? While his physical skills had understandably declined with age, there was still a sense of awe surrounding his return. He was Michael Jordan, after all, the player who had changed the sport forever. The Washington Wizards were a far cry from the dominant Bulls teams of the 1990s. They weren't championship contenders, and they had a roster that was filled with young players still learning the ropes of the NBA. Jordan's return was less about competing for titles and more about imparting his knowledge to a new generation of players. He wasn't coming back to save the Wizards, he was coming back to teach, to share the lessons that had made him a champion. Jordan's time with the Wizards was marked by moments of brilliance, but it also highlighted the challenges that come with age. His scoring ability, while still impressive, wasn't at the level it once had been. The explosive dunks and gravity-defying plays that had defined his earlier years were now a rare occurrence. But even in his twilight years, Jordan could still dominate a game. He had a basketball IQ that was off the charts, and his ability to read the game and make the right play was unparalleled. His leadership, his presence, and his experience were invaluable assets to the young Wizards players who got to share the court with him. Despite his declining physical abilities, Jordan still averaged over 20 points per game in his first season back with the Wizards, proving that even in his later years, he was still one of the most gifted players in the league. His performances were a reminder that greatness is not just about physical attributes, it's about mindset, preparation, and understanding the game on a deeper level. Jordan had long ago mastered the mental aspects of basketball, and even as his body began to betray him, his mind was still sharp. But the Wizards' success was limited. While Jordan's leadership and individual performances were impressive, the team's overall performance did not live up to expectations. They were competitive, but they never quite reached the level of contention that Jordan had experienced in Chicago. The team's inability to make a deep playoff run was frustrating, but Jordan's return had a different kind of impact. It wasn't about championships this time, it was about his influence on the next generation. The young players on the Wizards, like Richard Hamilton and Gilbert Arenas, were able to learn from the best. They witnessed firsthand what it took to be great, not just on the court, but in the way you approached every aspect of the game. Jordan's leadership off the court was just as impactful as his presence on it. After 2 seasons with the Wizards, Jordan retired for the final time in 2003. His second retirement was quieter, less publicized, and far less dramatic than his first. But by then, his place in basketball history had already been cemented. Jordan had transcended the game. His influence went far beyond the basketball court, he had become a global icon. His legacy wasn't just about the 6 championships or the MVP awards, it was about the way he had changed the sport, the way he had inspired generations of athletes, and the way he had elevated the standards of greatness. Even after his final retirement, Michael Jordan remained a figure that loomed large in the basketball world. He became an owner of the Charlotte Hornets, the team he had once been drafted by, and began a new chapter of his life. His impact on the sport remained, and his presence continued to inspire the next wave of players. Jordan's time with the Washington Wizards wasn't defined by championships or titles, it was defined by his resilience, his determination, and his refusal to let age and circumstances define his legacy. He had already proven that he was the best, but his return to the court with the Wizards showed the world that greatness isn't just about what you can do in your prime. It's about how you approach the game when the stakes aren't as high. Jordan's second act in Washington wasn't the triumphant return everyone had hoped for, but it was a testament to his love for the game and his undying commitment to excellence. In the years since, Jordan's legacy has only grown. His influence on the game of basketball, from his iconic moments to his business ventures, has had an indelible effect on the sport. The world will forever remember Michael Jordan not just for what he accomplished on the court, but for the mark he left on the game, the culture, and the generations of athletes he inspired. His legacy is secure, not just as the greatest basketball player of all time, but as a symbol of what it means to chase greatness relentlessly, no matter the obstacles. After Michael Jordan's second retirement, the basketball world seemed to lose its most powerful force, and for many fans, it felt like the end of an era. The NBA had been defined by Jordan's presence for more than a decade, and without him, there was a noticeable void. His absence from the game was felt deeply, not just by the Chicago Bulls but by basketball fans everywhere. Yet, despite his retirement from the NBA, Michael Jordan's influence on the sport and on the world continued to be profound. His impact extended far beyond his time on the court, shaping the game and setting the stage for the next generation of players. Even though Jordan had stepped away from playing, his connection to the game never fully disappeared. His business ventures, particularly with Nike and his Air Jordan brand, had made him a global icon, extending his legacy far beyond basketball. The iconic sneakers continued to fly off the shelves, and his name became synonymous with success, determination, and excellence in any field. Michael Jordan wasn't just a basketball player anymore, he had become a brand, a symbol of the pursuit of greatness. But even as he built his post-basketball empire, Jordan's love for the game never faded. In the early 2000s, he made his return to basketball, this time as part owner and team president of the Charlotte Hornets, a franchise that had struggled in the NBA for years. Many speculated about his decision to get involved with the team. Some believed that Jordan, having already reached the pinnacle of individual success, wanted to leave a new kind of mark on the league. Others wondered if he was searching for a different way to stay close to the game he loved. From the moment he became a part of the Hornets, Jordan brought the same energy and attention to detail that he had brought to every aspect of his playing career. He was determined to build a winning franchise, and his competitive fire, though no longer fueled by the desire to be on the court, still burned hot. He approached his new role with the same relentless drive, focusing on making the right decisions, drafting the right players, and shaping the team into a contender. He had gone from being the greatest player to one of the most influential team owners, using his unique perspective to create a culture of excellence within the organization. As a player, Jordan had been notorious for his work ethic, and as an owner, he brought that same intensity to the table. He was often seen courtside, observing every play, carefully studying the dynamics of the game, and offering advice to his players. Even though he wasn't on the court anymore, his presence was still felt in the locker room, where his influence shaped the team's culture. Jordan's transition from player to executive wasn't without its challenges. Leading a franchise in a different capacity required a different set of skills, and though Jordan had been a master of the game on the court, there were times when he had to adapt his approach to the front office. In the years following his return to the NBA as an executive, Jordan's Hornets began to slowly improve. While they never reached the heights of the Bulls teams he had led to 6 championships, the Hornets began to show signs of growth. Jordan's leadership and his deep understanding of the game were essential in shaping the team's direction. His legacy as a player, however, continued to cast a long shadow, as the Hornets struggled to make the playoffs year after year. Despite the team's lack of playoff success, Jordan's influence in the game of basketball continued to grow. His role as a mentor to young players became one of the defining aspects of his post-playing career. He wasn't just a businessman or a team owner, he was a figure of guidance for the next generation of stars. He offered advice, shared his experiences, and helped players understand the level of commitment and drive required to achieve greatness. Jordan's connection to the game reached beyond his own team. As an owner and mentor, he sought to have a hand in shaping the future of the NBA. His relationship with young players such as Kemba Walker and other rising stars in the league provided them with the wisdom and insight only a player of Jordan's stature could offer. He knew what it took to become a champion, and he wasn't shy about sharing those lessons with the next wave of talent. While the Hornets were a work in progress, Jordan's business ventures outside of basketball continued to flourish. His brand, Air Jordan, had grown into a cultural phenomenon. The sneaker line, which had begun as a partnership with Nike, continued to release groundbreaking new designs, each one more successful than the last. The Jumpman logo became a symbol of not just basketball excellence but of ambition and aspiration, representing the drive to succeed in any field. Jordan's name, more than ever, was synonymous with success, and his influence reached far beyond the world of sports. But even as he built his empire off the court, Jordan was often haunted by comparisons to the new generation of NBA stars. His legacy, though secure, was always under scrutiny. Players like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James were emerging as the faces of the league, and the debate over who was the greatest player of all time only intensified. For some, the new wave of talent posed a challenge to Jordan's dominance, but for Jordan himself, there was no doubt about his place in history. He had set the standard for what it meant to be the greatest, and no matter how the landscape of the game changed, his legacy was untouchable. Jordan's role as an owner was one of the most significant chapters in his post-basketball life. He may not have been out there scoring points or winning championships, but his involvement with the Hornets was a testament to his ongoing commitment to the game and to the development of basketball. His transition from a player to a business mogul and team owner reflected his adaptability and his deep love for the sport. Despite not winning another championship with the Hornets, Jordan's ability to influence the game remained unparalleled. His competitive spirit was still alive, even in the front office. As the years passed, he shifted his focus toward helping the next generation of players understand what it took to succeed, teaching them not just about basketball but about life. The NBA had evolved since he first entered the league, but Jordan's message remained the same: greatness doesn't come without sacrifice. In 2010, Jordan made history once again when he became the majority owner of the Charlotte Hornets. It was a full-circle moment for the player who had once been drafted by the team, and now he was in a position to reshape the franchise into a championship contender. Though it took years of hard work, and though the team struggled at times, Jordan never lost sight of his ultimate goal: to bring a championship to Charlotte. His drive and his ambition were as strong as ever, even though the days of playing on the court were far behind him. While his ownership didn't immediately result in championships, it allowed Jordan to leave a lasting legacy on the game in a different way. His leadership, his mentorship, and his role in growing the game beyond just playing made him a respected figure not just in basketball but in sports as a whole. His journey from a player to an owner was one of transformation, and it demonstrated his commitment to the game and to future generations of players. As the years went on, Michael Jordan's legacy only grew stronger. He remained a symbol of excellence, a reminder that hard work, perseverance, and the pursuit of greatness can take you to unimaginable heights. The debates about who the greatest player of all time were likely to continue, but for many, there would never be any question. Michael Jordan was, and would always be, the gold standard by which all other basketball players were measured. Michael Jordan's final years in basketball were defined not just by his extraordinary on-court achievements, but by the transformation he underwent from player to legend. He had built an empire, both on and off the court, and in the process, had shaped the very culture of basketball. His influence could be seen in every corner of the sport. From the young players who had idolized him, to the business ventures he had pioneered, to his role as an owner, Jordan's presence continued to resonate deeply. As the years passed after his final retirement in 2003, it became evident that Michael Jordan's legacy was more than the sum of his titles or his records. It wasn't just about being the best player ever to step onto a basketball court, it was about how he had redefined greatness itself. He had set an example for generations of athletes, pushing them to strive for more, to compete at the highest level, and to never accept anything less than excellence. Throughout his post-basketball life, Jordan remained a beacon for those who sought greatness, and his life after playing was just as impactful as his time on the court. He was a businessman, an executive, and a philanthropist, roles he approached with the same focus and determination that had made him a household name. His involvement with the Charlotte Hornets, both as a player and as the team's majority owner, allowed him to influence the game in a new way. He was shaping the future of basketball, helping the next generation learn what it truly meant to succeed. Even though Jordan's competitive fire still burned inside him, he had come to terms with the fact that his place in history was secure. His 6 championships, 5 MVPs, and countless accolades were more than enough to ensure his place as the greatest player in the history of the NBA. Yet, Jordan understood that his true legacy wasn't just about the trophies or the accolades, it was about the people he inspired, the way he had transformed the sport, and the standards of greatness he had set for all those who followed in his footsteps. In his later years, Jordan made efforts to reconnect with the fans who had supported him throughout his career. He began appearing at NBA events, not just as a legend, but as a mentor, offering wisdom to young players entering the league. His approach to life had shifted from that of a fierce competitor to that of a wise elder, someone who had seen it all and was now in a position to help guide others. The young stars of the NBA, players like LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and Kevin Durant, looked up to him not just as a legend, but as someone who had helped to pave the way for them. They sought his advice, and Jordan was always willing to provide it, because he understood that the game was bigger than any one player, and that the next generation had to carry the torch forward. Jordan's influence also extended far beyond the world of basketball. His impact on popular culture, particularly through his partnership with Nike, had made him a global icon. The Air Jordan brand had become synonymous with excellence and ambition. Even after retiring, his sneakers remained one of the most popular and iconic footwear lines in the world. His Jumpman logo, once the symbol of his on-court exploits, had transcended the sport to become a symbol of determination and success in any field. Michael Jordan was not just a basketball player, he was a brand, a figure whose name represented the pursuit of greatness. But as much as his influence in business and culture was undeniable, it was his humanity that left the deepest impact on those who knew him. Behind the fierce competitiveness and the drive to win, Jordan was a man who understood the value of family, loyalty, and the importance of community. Despite his fame and fortune, he never forgot where he came from. The lessons he had learned growing up in Wilmington, North Carolina, from his family, his coaches, and the people who supported him, stayed with him throughout his career and beyond. One of the most memorable moments of his post-basketball life came when Jordan turned his attention to philanthropy. After achieving so much success, he began to realize that the true measure of greatness wasn't in how many championships you won or how much money you made, but in the difference you made in the lives of others. He used his wealth and influence to create opportunities for underprivileged youth, both in his hometown and around the country. His charity work, particularly through his own foundation, focused on education and community development. Jordan became a mentor to countless young people, showing them that there was more to life than sports, and that true success came from helping others achieve their dreams. In 2016, as the NBA celebrated its 70th anniversary, Jordan was rightfully honored as the greatest player in the league's history. The recognition wasn't just for his individual achievements, but for the lasting impact he had on the game itself. His influence was far-reaching. He had brought attention to the NBA like no other player had, making it a global spectacle and inspiring generations of athletes to strive for greatness. Jordan's final years were not defined by his accomplishments, but by the peace he had found in knowing that his legacy was secure. He had built something that would endure long after he was gone, a dynasty, a brand, and a culture of excellence. While he had once played the game with a burning desire to prove himself, he now understood that his true legacy lay in the way he had inspired others to follow in his footsteps. The game had given him everything, but it was his ability to give back that truly defined his place in history. When Jordan passed away in 2023, the world mourned the loss of a giant, but his legacy lived on. In every corner of the basketball world, and every player who laced up a pair of Air Jordans, and every child who picked up a basketball and dreamed of greatness, Michael Jordan's spirit remained. His journey, from a young boy in Wilmington to a global icon, had come full circle. His story wasn't just one of championships and accolades, it was the story of a man who never gave up on his dreams, who constantly pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and who, in the end, gave the world a blueprint for greatness. Michael Jordan had redefined what it meant to be the best, not just in basketball, but in every aspect of life. And that, in the end, was his true legacy, a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Through his commitment to excellence, his unwavering belief in his abilities, and his desire to give back to others, Jordan had created a legacy that could never be erased. The world had witnessed greatness, and now it would carry that greatness forward, passing it on to those who would continue the journey. Michael Jordan had not just changed the game, he had changed the world.